The White House now trying to walk back President Trump's explosive allegations that former President Obama wiretapped his phones during the election. I want to bring in now CNN political analyst Carl Bernstein, the legendary journalist and author. Susan Hennessy is a fellow in national security law at the Brookings Institution, and Matthew Rojansky is the director of the Kennan Institute at the Wilson Center. Good evening. I'm so glad to have all of you on. So probably to no one's surprise, the deadline for the DOJ to provide evidence to back up President Trump's claims that the former President Barack Obama wiretapped him, that deadline has come and gone. They want more time, but the White House is trying to clarify what President Trump actually meant.
I think if you look at the president's tweet, he said very clearly, quote, wiretapping, in quotes. He doesn't really think that President Obama went up and tapped his phone personally. I think, but I think there's no question that the Obama administration, that there were actions about surveillance and other activities that occurred in the 2016 election. That is a widely reported activity that occurred back then. The president used the word wiretap in quotes to mean broadly surveillance and other activities.
I'm wondering, Susan, if that is SNL or if that was a real, briefing there, because a week ago Spicer said the tweet speaks for itself. So what do you make of this unsuccessful attempt to walk it back here?
Right. So one of the interesting things is that it doesn't necessarily matter whether or not it was wiretapping or other forms of surveillance. President Trump himself has raised serious questions about why exactly the FBI or President Obama would have reason to conduct that kind of investigation. I think most reasonable people doubt the existence of that investigation. The problem now is he's now raised the question, and so it's going to be incumbent upon Congress or the White House to come forward and explain whether or not the president was mistaken or otherwise false, otherwise mistaken, or whether or not Congress is going to have a report to produce the results of that investigation.
Yeah. And Carl, we have to keep in mind here that this was an investigation that the president called for himself with unsubstantiated claims or an unsubstantiated tweet. The White House now says that President Trump never really thought it was Obama specifically, but we go to the original series of tweets here, like this one. How long has President Obama gone to tap with two P's, by the way, tap my phones during the very sacred election process? This is Nixon Watergate, bad or sick guy. That seems pretty specific to me, because they're saying these quotes mean a difference. They're not saying the misspelling of tap means anything. It's just so weird, the random things that they say mean something and that we should glean from it. I mean, what do you think here? That seems pretty specific to me, especially when you say bad or sick guy. He's talking specifically about the former president himself.
It's not weird and it's not random. It's very purposeful that Donald Trump's lying and maliciousness is intended. He is not interested in the truth, particularly about anything having to do with his own conduct, with the conduct of those around him. He's trying to deflect attention from the investigation going on into the Russian hacking of the DNC and whether or not there is some connection with people around Trump. He's got to be considering the lying of Mike Flynn, his chosen national security advisor, the lying of his own attorney general about how or whether he talked to Russians, in this case the ambassador. We are looking at a presidency that is encased in a bodyguard of lies. And that is Donald Trump's problem. We've never had a president in such a fact-free environment before, including Nixon, including Clinton during the Monica Lewinsky thing. Clinton lied. Nixon lied. Nixon had a criminal presidency. But where we are now in terms of every day a fact-free environment with a president who recklessly puts out this stuff with no basis in truth is new territory. It's dangerous, and we got to see where it goes.
So you're saying this is more lies than any other administration that you can remember, that you can recall?
In a systematic way. Look, yeah. Nixon lied to cover up a criminal conspiracy of which he was an integral part. What we are seeing here is a president, a character with a long record of lying and fabulous statements in his career before he ever came into the political process, during the campaign, and since he got to the White House, it has been a fact-free environment, the likes of which I have never seen in I've been in journalism 55 years, 57 years actually. I've never seen anything like it, and I doubt that anyone else has.
Matthew, Sean Spicer also says that all of this was widely reported activity, which is untrue. It was not. And they often point to this New York Times report, which says nothing about Trump Tower being wiretapped. As if it's anything, it was a surveillance that was directed at Russian Ambassador Sergei Kislyak, which is not abnormal, correct?
Well, of course, it is both legally less problematic and politically makes a certain amount of sense to be following foreigners. You get into hot water when you start tapping or following Americans. I feel, though, I've got to make this point. I feel like the voiceover in an old Western, meanwhile back at the ranch. The Russians aren't standing still as they watch this fight unfold that's clearly political in nature. It's going to have an investigation. The latest things we're reading, not only are we now learning there have actually been Russian troops in Libya for the last several months doing a pretty significant operation. The Russians had General Haftar, the Libyan strongman, the sort of new Gaddafi, if you will, in eastern Libya. They've had him in Moscow now. They're clearly setting him up as Gaddafi's successor, maybe going to help him retake the whole country. And then just tonight, we're learning that the Russians have maybe put troops over the border, even into western Egypt. So to me, all of this just underscores that while we're pursuing an investigation and a big fight about what members of the administration did or didn't say, what we're not doing is we're not doing Russia policy. We don't have a deterrent. We don't have an effective dialogue with the Russians. The Russians are moving forward, and they're doing it without Americans being able to stop them.
Yeah. Are you saying they're saying, oh, wait, look over there when...
It has exactly that feeling. That's right. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. From their perspective, of course, they always argue, well, this is all defensive. We're just looking out for our interests. But that's been the argument all along, and that's basically why we've got to have a dialogue with them, because at the end of the day, this is a major global actor, and if there is a power vacuum somewhere in the world, especially in the Middle East, they're going to be there. That's just been historically true.
I want to get this in because it was so bizarre this week, and this Kellyanne Conway was asked about the wiretapping claims and said this.
There are many ways to surveil each other now, unfortunately.
Do you believe
there was an article this week that talked about how you can surveil someone through their phones, through their, certainly through their television sets, any number of different ways, and microwaves that turn into cameras, etc.
I suggest that it's time we all stop taking Kellyanne Conway seriously. She's not a serious person. It's time for us to drop her from our news agenda, unless she very specifically has something to say that we know has been put out there by the President of the United States.
Carl, I get your point. I get your point, and we'll finish it on the other side because I want you to hear how she clarified before we drop her, as you suggest. And here's what she said to Chris Cuomo about what she meant to say.
It was about surveillance generally, and the fact that
he didn't ask you about it generally, though. That's just true in the transcript. You may have answered it generally, but you were asked specifically.
Chris, I'm not Inspector Gadget. I don't believe people are using the microwave to spy on the Trump campaign. However, I'm not in the job of having evidence. That's what investigations are for.
I mean, we have lived with this for 9 days of to Matthews, it's just nonsense. They're not fooling anybody. They sound so silly trying to defend something that he was very explicit about exactly what he said, that the former president wiretapped him.
It's not silly. It's dangerous. And the extent to which we take it seriously, and what we need to do is keep doing our reporting on the real stories, including what's going on with the Russians, with Trump, the people around him, but also, as was just suggested in the brilliant synopsis that was given a moment ago by your other guest here, we have been successfully destabilized by Putin and the Russians. That's a big part of this story. We continue to be destabilized by the Russians and what is going on. Putin has got our number here. And we need to be looking at all aspects of this, including whether or not we have a president of the United States who is capable and responsible enough to deal with what is going on.
Yeah. Thank you
all.
all.
Speaking of sort of the question of responsibility, it is important to note that the president has leveled very serious accusations against the FBI and his predecessor. It's incumbent upon him to now make the case to the public.
That's true.
Were those false accusations or not?
Yeah. Thank you all. I'm out of time. Thank you. And the microwave, be careful out there. I'm going back to Jiffy Pop. Appreciate it. Coming up, a congressman tweets leads to charges of bigotry and racism, but he's not backing down. He's doubling down. Is it a sign of white nationalism? Is it going mainstream?